Hello students, welcome back to another online lecture of the online lecture series initiated by Shet Vidya Mandir, English High School and Junior College of Science and Commerce, Vasai. I am Mrs. Snehal Falkau. Students, in the previous video, we have already begun the study of chapter 4.3 from your English course book. The name of the chapter is Around the World in 80 Days. In the previous video, we have already discussed the summary and the theme of the novel Around the World in 80 Days. Today, we shall study chapter number 34 from the same. Around the World in 80 Days. Chapter number 34, in which Phileas Fogg at last reaches London. Phileas Fogg was in prison. He had been shut up in the custom house and he was to be transferred to London the next day. Passepartout, when he saw his master arrested, would have fallen upon Fix had he not been held back by some policemen. Oda was thunderstruck at the suddenness of an event which she could not understand. Passepartout explained to her how it was that the honest and courageous Fogg was arrested as a robber. The young woman's heart revolted against so heinous a charge, and when she saw that she could attempt to do nothing to save her protector, she wept bitterly. Phileas Fogg was in jail. He had been behind the bars in the custom house, and the next day he was supposed to be transferred to London. When Passepartout, his faithful servant, saw that his master Fogg was arrested, he was about to fall upon Fix the detective. But some policemen held him back from falling. Oda was thunderstruck, means she was extremely shocked, as this event of Fogg being arrested happened so suddenly that she could not understand what was going on. Passepartout explained to her how Fix, who was the detective, was mistaken that his master Fogg was a robber and how he arrested him for the same. He explained to her that Fogg was honest and courageous and he was not a robber. Oda's heart revolted, means felt disgusted against so heinous, means utterly wicked charge, means she felt disgusted that such a heinous and wicked blame was put upon Fogg. She saw Fogg behind the bars and she felt totally helpless. She could not do anything to save Fogg, who had protected her. She started crying bitterly due to her helplessness in saving Fogg. As for Fix, he had arrested Mr. Fogg because it was his duty, whether Mr. Fogg was guilty or not. The thought then struck Passepartout that he was the cause of this new misfortune. Had he not concealed Fix's errand from his master, When Fix revealed his true character and purpose, why had he not told Mr. Fogg? If the latter had been warned, he would no doubt have given Fix proof of his innocence and satisfied him of his mistake. At least, Fix would not have continued his journey at the expense and on the heels of his master, only to arrest him the moment he set foot on English soil. Passepartout wept till he was blind and felt like blowing his brains out. Fix had arrested Mr. Fogg because it was his duty. He did not care whether Mr. Fogg was guilty or not. He was just doing his job. A thought then ran through Passepartout's mind. He started blaming himself that he was the reason that this particular tragedy had befallen upon them. He thinks he is responsible because he concealed, means he hid the truth from his master that Fix was a detective and was behind him. He did not tell his master about Fix's errand, means his trip following his master. When Fix revealed his true character, that he was a detective and his purpose was to arrest Mr. Fogg, why did he not tell Mr. Fogg? If the latter, means if Mr. Fogg had been warned about Fix's motive, he would have definitely given Fix a proof that he was not a robber and he was innocent. If Fix had realized his mistake, that he was behind a wrong person, at least Fix would not have continued following Mr. Fogg and his company only to arrest him as soon as he reached the English soil. Passepartout kept crying till he was blind, means he cried too much and felt like blowing his brains out. To blow out brains is an idiom which means to kill by shooting in the head. Oda and he had remained, despite the cold, under the portico of the custom house. Neither wished to leave the place. Both were anxious to see Mr. Fogg again. That gentleman was really ruined, and at that moment when he was about to attain his end. This arrest was fatal. Having arrived at Liverpool at 20 minutes before 12 on the 21st of December, he had till a quarter before 9 that evening to reach the Reform Club, that is 9 hours and a quarter. The journey from Liverpool to London was 6 hours. If anyone at this moment had entered the custom house, he would have found Mr. Fogg seated, motionless, calm, and without apparent anger upon a wooden bench. He was not, it is true, resigned, but this last blow failed to force him into an outward betrayal of any emotion. It was very cold, yet Passepartout and Oda remained under the portico of the custom house. Portico is a porch or entrance to a building or a house consisting of a covered area. Both Passepartout and Order did not wish to leave the place. They both were anxious, that is, they were eagerly desiring to see Mr. Fogg again. Mr. Fogg was very much ruined, and this happened at that moment when he was about to win his bet. This arrest was fatal. Fatal here means leading to a failure or disaster. They had reached Liverpool when it was still 20 minutes before 12 on the 21st of December, which means they had till a quarter before 9 that evening to reach the Reform Club. That is 9 hours and a quarter. The journey from Liverpool to London was 6 hours. If anyone at that particular moment would have entered the custom house, they would see how helpless Mr. Fogg was. He was sitting on a wooden bench. He sat motionless and calm. Not any kind of anger appeared on his face. It is true that he was not resigned, means he had not given up on himself or his confidence. But this last blow means of all the hurdles, this last one, that is his arrest, did not make him show any kind of emotion strongly. He did not display any emotion. Was he being devoured by one of those secret rages, all the more terrible because contained, and which only burst forth with an irresistible force at that last moment? No one could tell. There he sat, calmly waiting. For what? Did he still cherish hope? Did he still believe now that the door of his prison was closed upon him, that he would succeed? However that may have been, Mr. Fogg carefully put his watch upon the table and observed its advancing hands. Not a word escaped his lips, but his look was singularly set and stern. The situation in any event was a terrible one, and might be thus stated: if Phileas Fogg was honest, he was ruined. If he was a knave, he was caught. Fogg did not show any emotion, example, sadness or grief or anger, and so maybe a secret rage means anger was developing within him. This secret anger is very much terrible because it was contained, means controlled and kept within himself, as he did not let his anger out. Such controlled anger comes out at the last moment, and when it comes out, it bursts out like a force that is irresistible, means which is very overpowering and cannot be controlled. Was this secret rage or secret anger that was contained within him devouring, means destroying him completely? No one could tell this. He was sitting there calmly waiting. For what? No one knows. Did he still have that hope that everything would be all right? With the doors of the prison closed upon him and he being trapped in there, did he still believe that he would succeed and win his bet? Mr. Fogg was seen putting his watch upon the table carefully. And as he sat there, he observed the hands of that watch as they kept moving forward. Not a word escaped his lips, means he did not utter a single word, but he kept looking on that watch sternly. The situation that Mr. Fogg had got into was really terrible, and so it can be thus stated. If Phileas Fogg was honest, he was ruined. If he was a knave, means deceitful or dishonest, he was caught. Did escape occur to him? Did he examine to see if there was any practicable outlet from his prison? Did he think of escaping from it? Possibly, for once he walked slowly around the room, but the door was locked and the window heavily barred with iron rods. He sat down again and drew his journal from his pocket. On the line where these words were written, 21st December, Saturday, Liverpool, he added, 80th day, 11:40 a.m. and waited. The custom house clock struck 1. Mr. Fogg observed that his watch was 2 hours too fast. Did Mr. Fogg think about escaping from the prison? Did he examine, means did he thoroughly check the prison room if there was any practicable outlet to get out from the prison? Did he think of escaping from that outlet? It was possible that he might have thought of escaping, because once he was seen walking slowly around the room, but the door was locked and the window heavily barred, that is, protected with iron rods. So, escape would be totally impossible. He sat down again and took out his journal from his pocket. In that journal, there was a line where these words were written. 21st December, Saturday, Liverpool. There he added these words. 80th day, 11:40 a.m. After writing this, he waited. The clock at the custom house struck 1. Mr. Fogg observed that his watch was 2 hours too fast. 2 hours, admitting that he was at this moment taking an express train, he could reach London and the Reform Club by a quarter before 9 p.m. His forehead slightly wrinkled. At 30 minutes past 2, he heard a singular noise outside, then a hasty opening of doors. Passepartout's voice was audible, and immediately after that of Fix. Phileas Fogg's eyes brightened for an instant. The door swung open and he saw Passepartout, Order and Fix, who hurried towards him. Fix was out of breath and his hair was in disorder. He could not speak. "Sir," he stammered, "sir, forgive me, most unfortunate resemblance, robber arrested 3 days ago, you are free." 2 hours. Fogg thought of what he would be doing if he were not arrested. At this moment, he would be taking an express train to London, and he would reach London and the Reform Club by a quarter before 9 p.m. His forehead slightly wrinkled due to some kind of noise that he could hear. When it was 30 minutes past 2, he heard a singular noise outside the prison. Then the doors were opened hastily. Passepartout's voice was audible, means his voice was clearly heard, and immediately after that, Fogg could clearly hear the voice of Fix. Mr. Fogg's eyes brightened for an instant. The doors were swung open and he saw Passepartout, Order and Fix running hurriedly towards him. Fix was out of breath, means he felt breathless because he came running to the custom house. His hair was in a disorder. He could not speak because of breathlessness. He stammered as he spoke to Mr. Fogg. He said, "Sir, forgive me. Most unfortunate resemblance. Robber arrested 3 days ago. You are free." He stammered and he could not say this in complete sentences. What he meant was that he was sorry for arresting Mr. Fogg. Mr. Fogg resembled, that means he looked very similar to the actual robber, and because of this confusion, he ended up arresting Mr. Fogg. Now, the actual robber had been arrested 3 days ago, so Mr. Fogg was free from the prison. Phileas Fogg was free. He walked to the detective, looked him steadily in the face, and with the only rapid motion he had ever made in his life, or which he would ever make, drew back his arms and with the precision of a machine knocked Fix down. "Well hit," cried Passepartout. "Pablo, that's what you might call a good application of English fists." Fix, who found himself on the floor, did not utter a word. He had only received his deserts. Mr. Fogg, Order and Passepartout left the custom house without delay, got into a cab, and in a few moments descended at the station. Phileas Fogg asked if there was an express train about to leave for London. It was 40 minutes past 2. The express train had left 35 minutes before. Phileas Fogg then ordered a special train. Mr. Fogg was now free. He walked to the detective, Fix, and looked him steadily in the face. He rapidly moved his arms back and with the precision, means perfection, of a machine, he hit the target. He knocked Mr. Fix down. Never in his life had Mr. Fogg done such a thing, and never in his life he would ever do this. "Well hit," cried out Passepartout. "Pablo, that's what you might call a good application of English fists." Pablo is a French word. In English, it means good Lord. Good Lord is an expression of exclamation used to express wonder, shock, or surprise. Passepartout said that Mr. Fogg had applied his fists appropriately by hitting Fix. Fix, who was now lying on the floor, did not utter a single word. He had only received his deserts, means he received a punishment that he well deserved. Without any further delay, Mr. Fogg, Order, and Passepartout left the custom house. They got into a cab, and in a few minutes they reached the station. Phileas Fogg asked if there was an express train for London. The time was 40 minutes past 2. The express train had left 35 minutes before. Mr. Fogg then ordered for a special train. There were several rapid locomotives on hand, but the railway arrangements did not permit the special train to leave until 3 o'clock. At that hour, Phileas Fogg, having stimulated the engineer by the offer of a generous reward, at last set out towards London with Order and his faithful servant. It was necessary to make the journey in 5 hours and a half, and this would have been easy on a clear road throughout. But there were forced delays, and when Mr. Fogg stepped from the train at the terminus, all the clocks in London were striking 10 minutes before 9. Having made the tour of the world, he was behindhand 5 minutes. He had lost the wager. There were many rapid locomotives on hand, means readily available for use. Locomotive means the powered engine of a train. But the special trains were not allowed to leave until 3 o'clock by the railway arrangements. At that moment, Mr. Fogg put forth the engineer an offer of giving him a generous reward. The engineer was stimulated, means encouraged or aroused by this offer, and at last provided a special train, and thus Mr. Fogg, with Order and his faithful servant Passepartout, left for London. It was essential that they should make the journey in 5 hours and a half. Completing the journey in 5.5 hours would have been very easy if the route was all clear throughout their entire journey. But unfortunately, there were forced delays which got them late. When Mr. Fogg stepped out of the train at the terminus, the clock in London was striking 10 minutes before 9. Mr. Fogg had made a tour of the world, and due to this he was behindhand 5 minutes, means he was 5 minutes late to reach London, which meant that he had lost the wager or his bet. That was all from chapter number 34 of Around the World in 80 Days. Thank you.